My name is Madison Clark. I'm 32 years old, a former naval officer, and I've landed fighter jets on storm-thrashed aircraft carriers with less fear than what I felt the night my mother's boyfriend shattered two of my ribs with his bare hands. And why? Because I refused to co-sign a $10 million loan. That number sounds absurd even to me. $10 million. But not to Victor Reed. Not to the man who paraded around like a businessman slinging bourbon and dreams in equal measure. Not to the man who wrapped his arm around my mother like he owned her and looked at me like a roadblock to his empire. I sat at the polished glass table in my mother's luxury condo, the one Victor paid for, or rather, the one he convinced her to mortgage in his name. The city lights from downtown Dallas flickered behind us all sparkle and silence, while he slid a thick folder toward me. His tone was syrupy smooth, but it didn't fool me. Not after what I had seen. Not after what I suspected. "Maddie," he said, voice low and charming like poison in warm tea. "It's just a formality. We're about to close on a huge acquisition. You'll be setting us up for life." I didn't even open the folder. I knew the trap before I saw the bait. I said no, calmly, firmly, professionally. I laid out the truth. I couldn't risk my security clearance, my financial future, or my name on a loan that large with someone whose background was a web of half-truths. I told him I could help review budgets, offer connections, anything but my signature. The silence that followed wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Victor's smile vanished. My mother, Evelyn, stood behind him holding a wine glass she hadn't touched. Her face drained of color. Victor stood up. The glass table trembled as his hands slammed down. "You ungrateful little brat," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you're smarter than me because you wore a uniform. You think you're better than your own family." My chair scraped against the tile as I stood heart pounding. I said I was leaving. I turned toward the hallway, but his body blocked me like a wall of fury. Then it happened. Fast. Brutal. His elbow crashed into my side, a blunt explosion of pain beneath my ribs. I gasped. He grabbed my shoulders and shoved me back against the wall so hard the framed photograph of my father, a decorated officer who died in service, tumbled and cracked against the floor. I crumpled to my knees. My breath came in broken gasps. My mother stood still, wineglass in hand, frozen, eyes blank. Then she said it, her voice quiet, even, emotionless. "It's just stress, Maddie. Don't make it worse." That sentence sliced deeper than any broken bone. And what they didn't know, what neither of them saw, was the phone in my jacket pocket. The voice memo app was still recording. Every word, every hit, every betrayal. If you've ever looked into the eyes of someone you once trusted and realized they would let you bleed to protect their pride, then this story is for you. If you've ever been told to stay quiet, not to make it worse, not to embarrass the family, not to ruin reputations that were built on top of your silence, then you are not alone. I see you. I was you, and I'm still here. I don't need pity. I don't need sympathy. But I do believe in truth. I believe in the kind of truth that burns away lies and exposes what hides behind polished smiles and family portraits. That night, I thought I had lost everything. My breath, my mother, my safety. But what I found was something stronger than fear. I found a voice I hadn't used in years. The voice that belonged to the woman I used to be before I started shrinking myself to make room for their egos, before I kept quiet at the dinner table to avoid another outburst, before I told myself they didn't mean it. You are about to hear everything. And when it hurts, keep listening, because the pain is not the end. The pain is the beginning of clarity. If you are someone who has endured, who has carried bruises on your skin or in your heart just to keep peace, I ask one thing. Let your presence here be your resistance. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Or just type the word survivor. Like this video if you've ever had to choose between your voice and your family's comfort. Subscribe if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, not buried. This isn't a cry for help. It's a declaration of war on silence. And I'm not backing down. Before the blood, before the silence, before the words that shattered whatever remained of my bond with my mother, there was a time when home meant safety. I grew up in San Diego, just a few miles from the naval base, in a white single-story house with blue shutters and a swing that my dad installed himself. My father, Colonel Jonathan Clark, was the kind of man whose presence filled a room without raising his voice. He was calm, principled, meticulous, the embodiment of what I believed honor looked like. My mother, Evelyn, back then, was warm and vibrant, the type of woman who could bake an apple pie while giving a briefing on event logistics. She was sharp-witty, and when my father walked into a room, she looked at him like he hung the stars. Our lives revolved around his deployments and homecomings, the rhythms of military life. I never knew wealth, but I knew pride, order, and love. Then came the accident, a training flight gone wrong. I was 19 when they handed us the folded flag. Something inside my mother died that day. At first, it was quiet grief sleeping late, forgetting appointments, letting dishes pile up. Then it grew darker. She withdrew from her friends, sold the house, and moved into a smaller condo on the edge of downtown. She said she couldn't stay in a place with so many ghosts. I believed her. I wanted her to heal. I came home from my second year at the Naval Academy to find a man named Victor Reed sitting at our dinner table. Tall tan with expensive cufflinks and a blinding smile. He said he was an entrepreneur, a consultant for startups, always on the verge of something big. I watched him charm my mother with compliments and expensive dinners, but his eyes never smiled when he looked at me. They evaluated, assessed, measured. At first, I kept my concerns to myself. My mother looked alive again, radiant even. She dressed up, joined country club luncheons, started talking about investing and business growth. Victor seemed to give her back a version of herself she thought she had lost. But as the months passed, cracks began to show. He encouraged her to open joint accounts for efficiency, he said. She stopped seeing her old friends, he called them draining. When she bought a new car, he said it was a gift but registered it under his LLC. I asked her about it. She got defensive. "You don't understand Madison," she snapped. "He takes care of me. He listens. He makes me feel seen again." And maybe that was true. Maybe for her, being adored even by a man with secrets felt better than being a widow with fading photos on the wall. Still, I kept my eyes open. I started looking into Victor. There wasn't much to find. No college degree, no business licenses in his name, just a web of shell companies and vague titles. I warned her. She called me paranoid, said I was jealous, said I didn't want her to be happy. It hurt, but I stayed close. I thought if I could be around, I could protect her from whatever scheme Victor was pulling. But I didn't expect to be the target. I didn't expect the day would come when he would ask me, her daughter, to put everything I had worked for on the line for one of his phantom ventures. I didn't expect that when I said no, the hand that struck me wouldn't be his alone. It would be hers too, in the form of silence, in the form of that awful, gutless sentence, "It's just stress." And still back then, in those earlier months, I held out hope. I told myself she'd come around. I told myself love would win. I was wrong. It started with barbecue ribs and red wine. I should have known then. My mother never cooked ribs unless she was trying to soften a conversation. It was one of her tells something she had always done since I was a teenager. Want to bring up something difficult? Serve Madison's favorite food. Try to bribe her with comfort. That night, I sat at their glass dining table while the scent of smoked ribs and baked cornbread filled the air. It was a crisp Friday evening in Dallas. The lights outside the condo's floor-to-ceiling windows blinked like an indifferent audience. My mother flitted between the kitchen and the table, overly cheerful, asking if I needed more wine, more butter, more everything. I watched her, studied the anxious twitch of her mouth, the way she avoided sitting down too long, how she kept glancing toward Victor. He was calm, too, calm, leaning back in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, sipping his bourbon like he had already won something. I kept my posture stiff, military. My instincts told me this wasn't a dinner, it was a performance. I was the audience. Or maybe I was the target. When the plates were cleared and my mother finally sat, Victor reached under the table and pulled out a thick folder. The cover was matte black like a corporate proposal. He slid it across to me with both hands. "Maddie," he said in that fake honey-sweet tone he reserved for manipulation. "We're at a pivotal moment. Big opportunity. Just need a little help to unlock it. I opened the folder slowly. Inside, loan documents, pre-approval letters, a legal contract with my name already filled in as co-signer, $10 million, a private investment deal, multiple properties, shell corporations, risk everywhere. I closed it and pushed it back without saying a word. I took a breath and looked at my mother. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I turned to Victor. "I appreciate your trust," I said, keeping my voice calm like I'd been trained. "But I can't sign this. My security clearance, my financial integrity, they're not up for negotiation. I can't risk everything I've built for a deal I don't even understand." I paused. "I can help you look over the structure. Maybe even connect you with someone in legal who could consult. But I can't sign this." There was a moment, one suspended second, where I thought maybe that would be it. A discussion, a grown-up disagreement. But then Victor's face changed. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. His calm turned to venom in a flash. "You ungrateful little brat," he spat. "You walk in here with your Navy attitude and act like you know everything. This family has sacrificed for you, and you won't lift a finger to help us when it matters." I stood up. My chair scraped sharply against the tile. "This conversation is over," I said, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Victor stood too. His body blocked the hallway that led to the door. "You think you're better than us? Don't you, Madison? You think a few medals make you untouchable?" He stepped closer. I smelled the bourbon on his breath. My mother still hadn't moved. She sat frozen, her wine glass in hand, as if watching some play she couldn't interrupt. "Let me pass," I said, voice low. "Or what?" he sneered. "You gonna call in the Marines?" I didn't answer. I shifted my weight, ready to move, and then he struck. His elbow came fast, brutal, slamming into the side of my torso. I heard a crack and felt a white-hot bloom of pain explode under my ribs. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall hard. Something crashed to the floor beside me. I looked down and saw it, the photo of my father in uniform, face-down glass, shattered. My breath came in short gasps. I collapsed to my knees, arms wrapped around my side. He wasn't finished. He grabbed me by the jacket and yanked me up, pressing me against the wall again, screaming something I couldn't even register. My vision blurred. Blood pounded in my ears. My body screamed with pain, with betrayal, with disbelief. And then, over it all, I heard her. My mother. Calm. Soft. Detached. "It's just stress, Maddie. Don't make it worse." She said it like she was discussing weather, like I had spilled wine, not cracked bone. I looked at her. She still hadn't moved. She still held the glass. Her face was blank eyes, dull mouth, a tight line of disapproval. The man she lived with had just assaulted her daughter, and all she could muster was blame directed at me. It was in that moment, crumpled on the floor with my ribs screaming and my dignity in tatters, that I understood something terrible and irreversible. She had chosen. Not just now, long ago. Maybe the first time he bought her a necklace. Maybe the first time she agreed to let him handle the finances. Maybe the first time she saw the real Victor and looked away. I had lost her long before this moment. The only difference now was that I couldn't pretend anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just closed my eyes and focused on the only lifeline I had, left the phone in my jacket pocket. The voice memo app was still running. It had caught every word, every insult, every snap of rage, every silence, and her voice. The sentence that would come to define our relationship. "It's just stress, Maddie. Don't make it worse." That recording would one day echo through a courtroom. But first, I had to survive the night. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember walking toward the door. I just remember the unbearable pressure in my chest and the taste of iron rising in the back of my throat. I remember the silence more than the shouting, the stillness of my mother's eyes as she looked through me like I was a stranger bleeding on her floor. I reached for the handle. Victor didn't try to stop me. Maybe he thought I'd collapse before I got far. Maybe he didn't care. My fingers trembled as I pushed open the door and stepped into the hallway. The cool air of the corridor struck my skin like a slap. I took one step, then another, the pain in my side flaring with every shallow breath. I held my arm tight across my ribs, instinctively guarding what had already been broken. The elevator was too slow. I took the stairs. Each step down was its own act of defiance, each landing a small victory. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't take my car keys. I didn't take my wallet. I had nothing but the phone in my coat pocket and the fury keeping me upright. The streets of Dallas were empty that night. Quiet. Too quiet. I walked without direction, barely seeing the road. I moved past closed shops and dark windows, past glowing signs that blurred into each other. My boots hit the pavement like drums in a funeral march. The pain was constant now, radiating from my ribs into my spine, up through my shoulder. Each breath was a struggle, like trying to inhale through shattered glass. I made it 6 blocks before I collapsed at a bus stop bench, gripping the cold metal bar to stay upright. I stared at my reflection in the plexiglass panel blood at the corner of my mouth. Hair matted to my face, eyes swollen. I looked like a stranger. I looked like someone who had lost everything, but I hadn't. Not yet. I fumbled the phone out of my pocket, thumb trembling as I unlocked the screen. The recording was still running. I stopped it and saved the file. The title came automatically, instinctively. Evidence. Then I tapped on a name I hadn't called in 2 years. Elena Torres, my best friend, my former squad mate. The woman who once pulled me out of a sinking aircraft when the hydraulics failed over open water. She picked up on the second ring. Maddie. Her voice was groggy, confused. I couldn't speak. I couldn't get the words out. The pain made my tongue thick. But she knew. Stay where you are, she said. Share your location. I did. 10 minutes later, headlights cut through the dark and her truck pulled to the curb. She jumped out before it fully stopped, hair wild, sweatshirt inside out, her face full of horror. Jesus Christ, Maddie, what the hell happened to you? I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. Victor. Her jaw clenched. She helped me into the passenger seat, wrapped a blanket around me from the back. We didn't go to her place. We went to the ER. I wanted to protest. I wanted to say no hospitals, no police. But I didn't. I was too tired, too broken. I surrendered to the rhythm of tires on asphalt and the low rumble of the engine. Inside that truck wrapped in wool and the smell of gasoline and coffee, I realized something important. I had escaped. Not just the apartment, not just the violence, but the illusion. The one that had told me I still had a mother. The one that whispered she would protect me. That part of me was gone now, replaced by something colder, sharper. A woman who would not go quietly. A woman preparing to fight. The hospital smelled like bleach and fear. The overhead lights were too bright, the waiting room too cold, and the silence too familiar, the kind that always follows pain. Nurses moved around me with quiet urgency, hands gentle but detached, questions clipped and efficient. Elena stayed by my side, jaw-clenched eyes tracking everything. She didn't speak unless necessary. She knew me well enough to understand that words were useless now. The doctor, a man in his 50s with tired eyes and a wedding ring worn thin, confirmed what I already knew. 2 fractured ribs on my right side, deep bruising around my shoulder blade, swelling along the spine. A slight concussion. They asked if I had fallen. I said no. I told them what happened in as few words as possible. His name, the location, the relationship, the fact that my mother had witnessed it and said nothing. The nurse paused as she entered it into the system. She didn't say a word. Her eyes said enough. They placed me in a private room for observation. Monitors beeped in slow rhythm as IV fluid slid into my arm. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting each one until my vision blurred. The pain medication dulled the edges, but it couldn't reach the center of the wound, the part where love used to live. Elena stepped out to get coffee, promising she'd be back before I closed my eyes. She left her phone on the table as if I might need it, as if the idea of being without contact was too risky. I watched the clock tick past 1 a.m., then 2, then 3. Not a single call came in. Not from my mother, not from Victor, not even a text. No guilt, no questions, no apologies. Just silence. I thought back to my childhood, the scraped knees, the fevers, the nightmares. My mother always came then. She brought ginger ale and cool washcloths, sang lullabies out of tune. Now her daughter was in a hospital bed with broken ribs, and no one from that house cared enough to even check. I wasn't surprised, but it still hollowed me out. Around 4 a.m., I picked up my phone and played the recording back. I sat there in that sterile room, listening to my own breath crack as Victor struck me, listening to the thud of my body against the wall. And then came her voice. That voice I had known my entire life. Flat, unmoving. "It's just stress, Maddie. Don't make it worse." I pressed stop. My thumb hovered over delete. For a moment, I wanted to erase it all, pretend it didn't happen, pretend I still had a mother worth calling. But then I remembered the photo that shattered when I hit the wall, my father's face beneath broken glass. The way his legacy was used to decorate the condo of the man who beat me. I saved the file again, this time under a new name, Weapon. I wasn't sure what I would do with it, but I knew I wasn't done. I wasn't going to let this disappear like every other bruised woman who got pushed downstairs or slapped behind closed doors. I was going to use every resource, every connection, every bit of training I had. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. I wanted truth, public, undeniable. I wanted them exposed, and I would start with that recording. When I was cleared to leave the hospital 2 days later, Elena picked me up in the same truck that had become my sanctuary. The bruise beneath my ribs was darker now, purple bleeding into blue, and every movement felt like a blade dragging across my bones. But I was standing. I was breathing. And more importantly, I was thinking. The first thing I did wasn't rest. It was research. I commandeered Elena's kitchen table like it was a command post, laptop open, notepad to the side, painkillers within reach. I began with Victor. I had searched him before, but now I wasn't looking to prove my suspicions. I was looking to dismantle his life. I started cross-referencing LLCs he had listed on public documents. I looked at property records, business licenses, SEC filings, everything he had ever boasted about owning or managing. And what I found was even filthier than I expected. Shell companies registered to fake addresses, business accounts that had been frozen due to suspicious activity, a pattern of extracting funds through co-signed loans from women he dated, women who vanished after defaulting on debts he orchestrated. One had filed bankruptcy 2 years ago. Another had reportedly moved to Florida and dropped off the grid. I couldn't find her. It was a pattern, one that was always just legal enough to avoid formal charges, always manipulative enough to avoid a paper trail. Except now, I had one. The recording. And my military background gave me access to networks most civilians didn't think to use. I made calls to friends in cybersecurity to a former JAG officer I had trained with. Quiet inquiries, discreet but deliberate. I started building a dossier, timeline, financial motive, behavioral patterns, legal inconsistencies. Elena watched all of this unfold with quiet awe. She knew me as a soldier, a pilot, a woman who operated under pressure, but she had never seen me like this. Cold, focused, relentless. "This isn't about just getting him arrested, is it?" she asked one night as I cross-checked bank transfers against wire fraud cases in Texas. I looked up at her, my jaw tight. "No, it's about making sure he never does this again. To anyone." "And her?" she asked softly. "Meaning my mother." I paused. "I don't know. Maybe I just want her to feel what it's like to watch everything fall apart and know you helped cause it. Maybe that makes me cruel." Elena shook her head. "That makes you human. My plan wasn't just legal, it was public." I reached out to a journalist I knew from an old Veterans Support Initiative, Julia Reyes, someone who had covered military abuse cases and corporate fraud. I didn't give her everything, not yet, but I gave her enough to know I was serious. She wanted proof. I told her to be patient. She'd have it soon. Meanwhile, I filed a police report. I gave them the recording. I demanded that a restraining order be issued against Victor. It wasn't immediate, but it was official. A small step, but a legal one. I also froze every account I had changed. All my passwords flagged my credit. I assumed Victor and my mother had access to everything. I left nothing vulnerable. Elena watched me do all of this with the silent approval of someone who had buried friends and seen the worst of war. She never pitied me. That's why I stayed. That's why I trusted her with my life. One night, I printed the photo of my father, the one that shattered when Victor hit me. I placed it on the wall above my laptop, a reminder of who I came from, of what I refused to become. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a soldier on a new mission, one that would end with the truth breaking through the polished walls they hid behind. And this time, I wasn't waiting for justice. I was building it, brick by brick, lie by lie, until everything they built on my silence collapsed in full view of everyone they ever tried to impress. The law office overlooked downtown Dallas from the 24th floor. Floor-to-ceiling glass framed the city like a painting, but I wasn't there for the view. I was there to bury the illusion of the family I had tried so hard to save. The firm belonged to Martin Phelps, a quiet, razor-sharp attorney who had represented military clients and corporate whistleblowers for over 30 years. He was calm, methodical, and asked precise questions that left no room for emotion. I liked him instantly. He reviewed the recording, twice, then again with his assistant. I watched their faces shift from skepticism to disbelief to grim resolve. "This isn't just assault," he finally said. "It's coercion, financial manipulation, and if we prove pattern, possibly racketeering." "You've got a solid case, Madison. But do you want to go public with this?" He asked it gently, but I knew what he meant. Once we filed a civil suit, once media got wind of the audio, there'd be no going back. My military reputation, my mother's name, Victor's crimes, they'd all be under scrutiny. I thought about the silence, about the moment Victor's elbow hit my ribs and my mother said, "It's just stress." I thought about the other women I couldn't find. I looked Martin in the eye. I want it public. I want everything under oath. And I want him to explain in front of a judge why he thought he could get away with breaking a decorated officer's ribs for not signing a loan. Phelps smiled, tight, respectful. Then we begin. The legal process moved fast because I moved fast. I signed the affidavits. I submitted the hospital records, the police report, the background checks. I authorized Martin's team to investigate Victor's businesses in depth. I also delivered something else. The full archive I had built, photos of checks my mother had written from joint accounts, images of property deeds under shell company names, even screenshots from social media posts Victor had since deleted bragging about getting investors to play big. Every breadcrumb mattered. We scheduled the first deposition. We sent the subpoenas. And then I sent one more thing in email. It was short, direct. No emotion. To Evelyn Clark. Subject notice of litigation. Attached PDF of my witness statement, her name listed under accomplice to financial coercion, along with a time-stamped transcript of the audio recording. She didn't reply. But I knew she saw it. Meanwhile, Julia Reyes from the news outlet followed up. I had promised her something powerful. Now I gave her clearance to release it. We planned the article drop to coincide with the filing. Her team verified every claim. By the time the lawsuit hit the courts, the headline went live. Veteran Navy pilot sues mother's boyfriend over $10 million loan and alleged assault. Exclusive audio inside. It spread like wildfire. Not because I was famous, but because I was ordinary. Because I was the kind of daughter who sat through polite dinners and watched her mother vanish behind a man's ambition. Because I looked like the woman in someone else's family who always stayed quiet. I didn't read the comments, but Elena did. She told me survivors were writing in. People who had been scammed, beaten, silenced. Some who had filed charges and never been believed. Others who had never spoken until now. The media storm hit Victor hard. His shell companies went under scrutiny. His investors backed out. Creditors demanded answers. One of his LLCs filed bankruptcy within 2 weeks. His lawyer tried to dismiss the suit as a family dispute, but the audio said otherwise, and then came the court date. I wore my Navy dress uniform, not to intimidate, but to remind myself who I was before they tried to make me small. Victor walked in with his lawyer and no tie. My mother wasn't there. She had filed a motion to delay her deposition citing emotional strain. I didn't care. I took the stand. I played the audio. I watched the courtroom fall silent. I looked the judge in the eye and told the truth. Not just the legal truth, the emotional one, about what it's like to be betrayed not by strangers, but by the people who raised you, about what it's like to realize that silence is their favorite weapon, and that I was done being their shield. When I stepped down from the stand, I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean, like the rot they planted in me had finally been cut out. Let the world see it. Let the shame fall on the ones who earned it. I didn't need to hide anymore. It took 3 weeks for the verdict to come in, but by then the damage was already done. Victor Reed was found liable for aggravated assault and financial coercion. The civil court ordered him to pay damages exceeding $1.4 million money he no longer had because his empire had already crumbled under public scrutiny. But I didn't care about the money. I cared about what came next. He was arrested the same afternoon for multiple counts of tax fraud and suspected wire fraud from previous ventures charges triggered not just by my case, but by other victims who had come forward after seeing my story. The dominoes fell fast. 2 of his former business partners testified against him in exchange for leniency. A class action lawsuit followed. He was no longer the confident man sipping bourbon in a penthouse. He was a defendant in a federal case, hands shaking hair, graying his smirk replaced with silence. But the part that cut deeper wasn't Victor's collapse. It was hers. My mother, Evelyn Clark, the woman who once packed my lunches and cried when I graduated basic training, the woman who stared blankly as her boyfriend shattered her daughter's ribs and called it stress. When the deposition finally happened, she arrived dressed in beige with pearls at her throat, as if trying to embody the version of herself she used to be. She refused to answer most of the questions, claimed she didn't remember key events, claimed her loyalty to Victor had clouded her judgment. When asked if she believed I had been assaulted, she paused too long and finally said I didn't see anything that justified police involvement. That sentence made the headline. Veteran's mother denies abuse despite audio evidence. Public opinion turned on her instantly. She lost her volunteer role on the city's Women's Council. Her friends stopped returning calls. The country club rescinded her membership. Not because they cared about me, but because she had become bad PR. I watched from a distance as her world shrank. Her bank account was frozen during the investigation into shared financial assets with Victor. Her condo, which she had bragged about furnishing in cash, was revealed to be partially financed through a line of credit tied to a fraudulent loan now defaulted. She was forced to sell. She moved into a small apartment in the outskirts of Arlington. No staff, no standing invitations, just her and the silence. I never contacted her again, but I heard from mutual acquaintances that she'd started blaming everyone else. Said I had been brainwashed by the military, said I had staged the audio, said Victor had changed under stress and that I had exaggerated everything for attention. None of it mattered. The truth was public, documented, unraveled in court, archived in every article that quoted the judge's closing words. It is not only the abuser who bears responsibility, but those who protect them through silence and complicity. I carried those words with me. They didn't heal everything, but they validated what I had screamed inside for years. I was no longer the daughter seeking approval. I was no longer the cadet trying to honor a legacy while carrying a secret. I was Madison Clark, Lieutenant Commander, survivor, and witness. I rebuilt slowly. I returned to my post with a modified schedule, my physical therapy integrated into daily routine. Elena stayed in my life closer than ever. We built a new rhythm, one that didn't involve explaining our scars to people who didn't want to see them. One night, she framed the recording's waveform for me, a jagged line of audio spikes, the visual shape of violence. Beneath it, she engraved 3 words. She heard everything. We hung it in my hallway across from my medals. Not to honor pain, but to mark the moment I stopped being afraid of it. Let my story be loud. Let the silence fall on them. They say fire destroys everything, but that's only half true. Fire consumes the surface, yes. It scorches what is weak, what's dried up and hollow. But what it also does is clear the way. It burns through rot and illusion, leaving space for something else to grow. I didn't know who I'd be on the other side of this. Not at first. The lawsuit, the exposure, the courtrooms, the headlines, they stripped away every layer I had worn to protect myself. The loyal daughter, the quiet professional. the one who smiled through holidays and swallowed rage for the sake of family. All of that was gone now. In its place was something more dangerous, more honest, more alive. I took a short leave from duty, but I didn't waste it. I started speaking quietly at first, then more publicly. Veterans groups, women's advocacy organizations, survivor networks. I stood in front of rooms of strangers and told the truth about Victor, about Evelyn, about what happens when silence is more violent than fists. People cried, people stood up, and most importantly, people began telling their own stories. That's how I knew it was worth it. Not the lawsuit, not the headlines, but the ripple, the echo. One woman in El Paso said her father had threatened to disown her if she left her abusive fiancé. After hearing me, she left. A man in Kansas reached out, said his daughter had gone quiet after a controlling boyfriend moved in. After reading my story, he flew out to see her to ask questions to stay. Every message felt like breath returning to a world that had gone cold. And as for me, I stopped apologizing. I stopped justifying my pain or explaining my decisions. I redeployed to a leadership role stateside, mentoring younger officers. I taught them strategy, resilience, but also boundaries. I told them on record that honor has nothing to do with silence, that loyalty is not submission, that family, when weaponized, becomes its own kind of battlefield. Elena and I moved in together 6 months after the trial, not because I needed protection, but because I wanted peace. She didn't ask for explanations. She just handed me a key and said, "Here's to rebuilding." One night, I asked her why she never once said, "I told you so." She looked up from her book and said, "Because I knew you'd survive. I just didn't know how long it would take you to realize you deserved to." That was the moment I cried, not for Victor, not even for my mother, but for myself. For the years I had spent trying to earn love that had conditions. For the birthdays I spent at that condo pretending things were normal. For the girl who thought being strong meant being quiet. I had to let her go. Not with bitterness, but with grace. She did what she had to do to get me here. Now I was different, and stronger, and free. I framed the court transcript's final paragraph and placed it next to my father's folded flag. One legacy ended in silence. The other rose through it. I don't forgive them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I've released them. Their power, their shadows. They don't own my breath anymore. They don't get to live rent-free in the back of my mind, whispering shame every time I speak. I've taken back my voice, and with it my life. So if you're still watching, still reading, still listening, know this. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not obligated to stay silent to make others comfortable. And you are not alone. You were never alone. My name is Madison Clark. And this story of fire, fracture, and rising, this is not a tragedy. This is a beginning. One earned, one fought for, one no one else gets to write but me.